Alright, so as I've been alluding to, I have been wanting to use the next few verses or so that I'm going to do to look at some more of the Best Picture winners that we haven't talked about yet, given the whole award season that we're in, getting close to the end now. So I just want to try to squeeze these in real quick before that. And in this particular case, this was another one of those cases where I kind of had to look up, like, what other movies are like The Sting, because I know they're out there, but like to really sort of capture, because The Sting is one of those movies where it's like we had con artist movies before it and everything, but it's really everything after The Sting is like it kind of makes you feel like we wouldn't really have those movies without The Sting, like without the style that it has and the way that George Royal basically made the whole con artist thing into like this genre where this is always the point where if you're going to compare it to anything, it'll always come back to this when you're watching any other movie with characters like this that pull off these elaborate jobs, if you will. So mostly it seemed to go towards Catch Me If You Can, just basically maybe not necessarily in what exactly how the cons are executed, but just sort of the. I mean, if you look at it, in movie history, and you think of all the different con artists that have been put to film, fictional or non-fictional, there is two that really stand out in Johnny Hooker and Frank Abagnale. So I think I would like to start with The Sting, actually, since it's the Best Picture winner of the group. And as I mentioned, George Roy Hill's name, who is also the director of many things, but most notably Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So this is the reunion of him and the two stars 4 years later, 1969 to 73. And there's another actor in here that returns also, but we'll get there. And the thing about this movie, actually right from the start, if you want to go in the Butch and Sundance direction, what's really nice about this that you won't find in that movie is you'll notice the sort of chemistry that the two of them have, Newman and Redford, and there was something that's so like joyous about watching them in Butch and Sundance as they go through that whole movie. And that movie itself, only trouble is when you watch Butch and Sundance, you know that no matter how fun and joyous it may seem in certain places, we're eventually going to get somewhere tragic. And that's always kind of looming over that movie. With The Sting, you just kind of get to fully embrace the fun aspect of it. Like, I hate to use the word fun a lot because it's relatively vague, but thrown around way too much. But it's a sort of like, not just necessarily the energy of it, but there's this certain way you watch this movie where not only do you have to, obviously if you're fully aware of it, you don't have to worry about the fact that, oh, they're all going to die at the end, so it doesn't matter. But no, not only that, but there's something about the way the cons are executed within the movie that brings out the performances even more, in a way, because you've sort of got this acting on acting sort of thing going on where there's like multiple layers to it, because what the cons are in this movie are basically like their own sort of acting set pieces that they set up themselves, all the way down to getting other actors, extras, and bringing in their own production design, all that. Location scouting, they have to do all that stuff and completely build these cons from the ground up and basically put on plays where the main actor, who would be Robert Shaw in this case, doesn't know that he's in it. And the fact that they have to keep that up. And there's those moments where, like, especially when they're doing the horse race scene, when you see, Newman acting like he's the big boss to Redford, and the whole back and forth they have, and he's supposed to seem like this really intimidating dude. And you can just kind of see by the looks they give each other, like, the fun they're having doing this, not just the characters within, but Newman and Redford themselves, doing this sort of acting on top of acting thing. Which is really great, and that's, I think, where a lot of just how energetic this movie is, and where it comes from, the sort of creativity surrounding exactly how they do all this. Because another great thing I like about this, that you can't necessarily always say about Catch Me If You Can, especially given that, because in Catch Me If You Can, one of the really fun things about it is seeing how he, like, goes through his process, like how he goes through, like, forging the checks and all that, and sort of struggling to learn the terminology and all that. But there's something more so about the Sting where it feels like, and this is a problem I've had with a lot of like con artist movies that think they're it's sort of like there was an era after Soderbergh's Ocean's 11 where every movie wanted to seem like super cool and try to fool the audience in as many ways as they could. I could do a whole thing on the. I already done many whole things on the Now You See Me movies, and how basically the whole thing is we desperately want to say fuck you to the audience and want to be one step ahead of them, so they spend the whole movie going, oh, the movie's so much smarter than I am, I never saw that coming. Even though there is one final payoff in The Sting that does go in that direction, the rest of the movie, and it does that, as well as any movie ever has. It's like the crowning example of how that works. But for the rest of the movie, I think a lot of the joy in watching the cons also is the fact that we as the audience are always in on it. Like, we always kind of know, and I know lately, I can understand the want and need for a writer or director to say, the audience should know so that we can, build on it. And there's not, because there's something about knowing what the plan is and then seeing it unfold without like any problems, like you sort of expect that, but then it kind of also has become its own cliche to where it's like, if you know how the plan is going to play out, something's going to go wrong, and if we don't see what the plan is ahead of time, it's going to go perfectly smoothly. But this movie is able to kind of play with both a little bit, in a way, like I said, in such a skillful way that hasn't really been replicated as well as this. Some movies have somewhat succeeded, but clearly this is like the ultimate thing. And like I said, being able to, just not have to feel like you have to be ahead of everything, to sort of let the audience in on it, so that we can feel the excitement that they do, knowing that they're in on it. Like I said, when you can see those looks they give each other, even when the job is still going on. That sort of familiarity, I think, is something that really is what really works in making this engaging, and not just you waiting to see like what the next little payoff they have up their sleeve that we don't know about is. But like I said, when that does come in like the final scene, it's like it's kind of even more so makes that a really nice payoff, because we assume we know everything going in because the movie's made us so comfortable in that, and it's only at the last minute that they're like, oh, we had to not show you all our surprises, which is really satisfying. In particular with Redford, because obviously the chemistry is what really does it here, but Redford, despite Newman having the first credit, actually Newman, Redford, and Shaw are all on the same title card at the beginning, but there is this thing here where Redford is more or less, the lead. Got the leading actor Oscar nomination. To this day, his only one, weirdly enough. Because obviously he won for director for Ordinary People 7 years after this, but only acting nomination was for this movie. And it's really easy to see why. Going into... Well, we'll kind of go into him, because the first thing I want to talk about as we work our way to talking about Redford is sort of just the production design in general, setting the movie in 1936, I think it is. And the thing about this being a period movie, the way this works in just as many ways as it does, and as many ways as Hill uses to make this happen. Because for starters, when you just look at the, like I said, the production design in general, but also like the score. You've got Hamlisch's score, but on top of that, you've also got Scott Joplin doing the piano, like the theme, The Entertainer, I think it's called. Sort of has like this, obviously this is a bit pre-1930s, but it sort of sounds like the final notes you would hear in the score of like a silent movie from like the 20s. Yet it still perfectly fits the whole setup and feel of this. And that even also continues in scenes like the scene at the barbershop. That almost kind of plays out like a silent movie where we don't hear... The audio's cut off and it's just the music and the actors. So stuff like that really works also. Marvin Hamlisch had a really good year here, because he had won... He won the Oscar for score for this, but the score back then was still split up between, like... what was it? Like song score or adaptation, and then, like, dramatic score. So he won the adaptation for this, and then he won original score for The Way We Were, and then The Way We Were also won song. So Redford was basically Hamlet's just like good luck charm this year, um, and it really does pay off also. But the thing about how this movie looks and feels is it's 1973 is obviously when it came out, and it's big. One of its biggest competitors at the Oscars that year was The Exorcist. And it's like you look at The Sting and you look at The Exorcist, and The Sting is just so good about getting that feel. Doesn't The Sting feel like it should be so much older than The Exorcist? Like, they feel like so far apart time wise, and it's just such a testament to how well they've really set the era there. Because there's also, like, I mean, when you talk about the production design, obviously, it's their job to just sort of do this and make everything feel that way. But when you get these shots where, like the scene where Redford is trying to warn Luther, or just any of these scenes where Redford has to haul ass through the town, and it's like how we can get these big shots of him just running all the way from one place to another without a cut. And it just, everything, just, the whole world feels like it's in the 30s. No matter, even if he has to, like, turn the corner and go somewhere seemingly completely else. Where in any other movie, it might seem like just he's walking off a set, cut, and then he's on another set. But the whole thing just feels so incredibly authentic, especially with the way it's shot. So that's something that's always really stood out to me, was how well they were able to do that. But also, even further, some of the sort of technical aspects Hill wanted to use to capture that sort of 30s era to basically make it look like it was a movie that was shot in the 30s also, like with the way the editing goes too, particularly with the transition shots where it looks like really, old fashioned, where you've got like the wipe transitions and like the iris shots, the circle that goes in and out, where sometimes it's to black and then back into another, but into the next shot. But then sometimes it's also sort of like a dissolve, where it just does the iris shot, but it's from one scene directly to the other without the black, and it's like that shit's really beautiful too. So yeah, and so as far as it goes in regards to this opening, after we've set up this world and how it feels that authentic in like the first 30 seconds, if that. Obviously the whole, like the title cards and the chapter cards and all that feel the same way also, with those illustrations and all that. But then in regards to Hooker's character and what Redford's doing here, what I really like immediately is this introduction, where once we sort of get this, glimpse of the setting, we start to follow these legs that are walking down the road, and going into the movie, you probably automatically assume that it's Redford. When it's that dude Matola that ends up being... Well, obviously he's the whole jumping off point for the entire movie, but I mean, as far as him as a character, he's pretty inconsequential for the guy that's the opening shot of the movie. So, and then what's interesting about that is that they double up on that by, after seeming like we've got this character introduction that ends up just being Matola, when they actually do bring Hooker into the movie, he's so unassuming, which is exactly the point, because Matola does not have any idea where he's coming from at all the first time he sees him. So when he just sort of waltzes into the scene, just as, Matola sees this himself, I really just like how I was able to capture that from basically Matola's perspective, is how we're introduced to Hooker. He's not introduced as if he's going to be the main character of the movie at all, which I really like. It's also kind of a nice sort of throws a wrench into when they introduce Matola, like visually, as if he's going to be a major character. And then once he's conned, we never see him again. We never even see his body after he's been killed. We just hear about it, and we don't even see what he did after he realized he'd been conned. We just hear about it, and it's like it's that inconsequential, despite the fact, like I said, it's the starting off point that makes Shaw want to kill them. Robert Shaw, I have to specify, since that's also the alias for Newman's character, which can get a little confusing, but even so. I really love that stuff. And then, obviously, we bring in these sort of side characters that may be crucial, may not be, but the thing is it doesn't really seem to matter, because I already talked about the introduction of Matola and how consequential but also inconsequential he is. But then we also have the likes of like Luther, who is Robert Earl Jones, the father of James Earl Jones, who once again is basically set up to be. Well, we kind of know, if we know enough cliches, what's going to happen to him, because he's talking about being out of the game and all that. But there is something here about his character also where we get just enough between him and Hooker that it actually does mean something when, number one, this will come back towards the end also with Luther's widow, but there's also the whole thing where when Luther is killed and Hooker shows up, and it's like, obviously for him to be like this con artist that he is, we have to imagine that there's maybe something like maybe he doesn't get that emotionally involved, sort of like when we're introduced to Crystal, where it's like that it seems to be his girlfriend of sorts. And like the first thing he does when he has money is he buys the new clothes and he buys the flowers, to the point that everybody's asking him if he's getting married or something. And once again, she just really is just another sort of just something in Hooker's routine, and really nothing more than that. But the way they introduce her, where like they actually take the time to just sort of settle and watch everything and let everything come in, regardless of how important it is. So we get this whole nice introduction to Crystal where she does the dancing and then comes in and is like screaming about, the beats throwing off her routine. And then to the point that when they leave, the camera just lingers there for that comic that went on after her to finish his joke in its entirety before it cuts to the next scene. How it just willingly sort of takes everything in. And then that's, of course, when we're introduced to Luther. And the thing about this is, it seems like when everybody else sort of seems like a routine in his life, we get a sense that Luther really is something to him rather than just a partner in crime, especially in this moment when he sees Luther's body, and then Luther's wife comes in, and when he knows he has to make a getaway or else he's going to get caught and or killed by Lonergan's guys. There's also that shot where, like, just for a second, when he stops and he looks back at Luther's body, and it's like, you can sort of see, like, he's taking in the death of a friend, for sure, and that's gonna really get inside him, but then there's also the kind of knowing that that's sort of what's coming for him also, and the fact that Redford sort of captures all that in that one look before he runs away, it is really great stuff, and really goes right into how exactly the fact that we know, even if Hooker seems quite reckless when we first know him, because the first thing he does when he gets all of his money is blows it. This is the first time when we see Hooker realize, like, the consequences of what he does and how that's gonna, we can kind of feel that impact on him for the rest of the movie. Like, when they're doing the whole thing against Robert Shaw throughout the entire rest of the movie, we now know, pretty much because of that look in itself, not just the scenario, that Hooker understands the gravity of this and how dangerous it really is, and it really says something about his character for the rest of the movie. So of course that takes us to Newman's character, which, once again, it's really, he doesn't really have near as much as to do and work with as Redford does, because Redford comes in so much earlier, but just sort of immediately, the way when we see him, he's sort of the whole, that sort of cliche of you go after the guy that's supposed to be the guy that is the professional and knows how to do everything and is like the best of the best, and he's just totally and completely drunk. He's basically like the Rooster Cogburn of the con world, and so, but there's the really interesting full circle thing where we see, the first time we see him, he's like, completely drunk and out of it, but as he comes out of it, we get to see him transition from total and complete useless drunk to, yes, being that guy that is pretty much the best at what he does. And how we kind of come full circle, where one of the first things they do with the job when he goes to the poker game on the train is he has to act drunk, and that's what's actually going to be the setting off point for this whole thing. So I was really kind of like that also. But then there's also, and then, that whole, card game in general, I think, is probably one of, if not the most famous scene in the movie. And really building up Robert Shaw as this ultimate sort of villain, as he often did, because From Russia with Love had already happened. He'd already shown that he could be, like, big and kind of had that intimidating voice and stuff, like A Man for All Seasons. But this was 2 years prior to Jaws, but obviously he would continue to go on to do something similar in regards to like being intimidating and gruff. But as far as this character goes, as we see in this scene, where it doesn't take much poking and prodding at all to set him off during this game, but we're already pretty aware of what he's capable of before then. And I like some of the little clues we get, where he doesn't even have to do anything. It's how the other characters sort of react to him. Like when they're, setting up one of the jobs and they have to rent that space. And the guy, once he learns who the target is, he insists they pay up front in the event that they're dead and can't pay him once it's all over with. And the way he's sort of, very easily nonchalant, because we've got his sort of henchman there, Floyd, who is one of the returning cast members from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He's also probably recognizable to a lot of people as the Killer Santa at the beginning of Silent Night, Deadly Night. Uh, but he does have like this ultimate henchman look. He looks like he walked right out of Dick Tracy, which is absolutely sort of fitting, I feel, here. And the way that he sort of breaks the news to Lonigan, and it's like, what do we do about this? And it's every now and then it goes from nonchalant to getting more and more serious the more they fail to catch Hooker and kill him. So you have the stuff that they just sort of throw in there, like when he says, should we just let him go because we didn't catch him? And it's like, that guy that's my golf buddy over there, I've known since I was 6 years old, and if he found out that a grifter conned me, I'd have to kill that guy because that's just what I would have to do. It would just be business. I would have to kill him if Hooker got away. Otherwise, he would see me as vulnerable and be able to weasel his way in. And that's just the way that he thinks. He just basically, we get this sense that he has to be relentless because that's how he's gotten to the position he's in and how he's going to keep it. But sometimes it feels like he'll go that extra mile just because, and that's easily gotten his sort of reputation when Newman's describing him in like his first scene when he says he basically kills for the pride of it and not necessarily just for that whole protecting his business angle thing. To the point that the way Newman also puts it is that he'll basically kill a grifter over money that wouldn't even support anybody for 2 days, just to make that point. And so when we see him and Newman in these scenes, and the way Newman plays him in these cons, it's like, it's so interesting to have this character built up so much, and just see Newman, whether in the act or not, just sort of tear him down and sort of expose him as the sort of cheater that he is. And you can sort of feel the character shrinking the more Newman, like, basically, this character he's created, Shaw, go figure, it sort of becomes like an equal here, and it's suddenly like evens the playing field, and that's something that's really interesting to watch for this character throughout. And also some of those little things in there, like the fact that this wasn't even supposed to be in there apparently, but the fact that Robert Shaw suffered like a knee injury on a handball court like a week before they started shooting, so he's got this brace on his leg that you can't see because of his costume, which is why he's got like that sort of limping walk to him that also kind of gives him this sort of seasoned look about him, and sort of adds to that. Weirdly enough, like, a visible injury can make him seem more intimidating. Like, him being, like, held back by something actually makes him seem worse, which is really cool. So, and then we've got, characters thrown throughout all this, like Charles Durning, most notably. And I would say one of his more famous parts, despite the fact this is a guy that's famous for Dog Day Afternoon, The Best of the Whorehouse in Texas, a few Coen Brothers movies. But it's like, you walk up to like a movie fan and say, "Gotcha, Hooker," in that voice, you immediately associate the actor with that. And so, and obviously throughout, we've also got the whole side thing going on of this supposed assassin that's been hired to take Hooker out and will pretty much wipe out anything. And this is another thing where they actually make the fake out work. And it's sort of like a genuine surprise, your first go around, because you see, there's such an interesting different directions this goes, because we know that Shaw has hired this seemingly ultimate assassin that he's got, So we start seeing this mysterious faceless person with gloved hands following Redford around. And then, but the thing is, the fact that we don't see their face makes you think, like, it's part of the intimidation tactic to the audience that we don't know who this is. We don't have a face to put with them. It never really occurred. Like, it may possibly occur to any particular audience members that maybe they're not showing his face because it's a character we already know and they're hiding something. And it's like, well, yes and no, and that's what makes it so brilliant. Is it's like, yes, the assassin is somebody we've met before. It just happens to not be this person at all. And that whole fake out is really, really well done and really well executed, if you'll excuse the phrasing. So yeah, and that's basically what this all comes down to. Like I said, the main thing is it's so incredibly involving for basically being the poster child for a genre that has nowadays been about alienating the audience and trying to keep them in the dark as much as possible so you can show off how clever you think you are. And that this embraces the audience and says, like, basically say, come on and have fun with us. And every now and then we'll throw you a little surprise, and it works. So I think that's what I really love about this movie, and how it has such a really wide appeal that it does. And it's also incredibly exciting too, and not just the cons themselves, but there's also an action scene here and there. There's the really nice foot chase with Redford towards the end is really well. That's every time I watch the movie and he turns that corner and the dude's there, I like recoil. But still, and of course, it is nice to also see that a movie so fun and so energetic about itself can be the Oscar success that this was. Especially being up against, like, an Ingmar Bergman movie and The Exorcist, and A Touch of Class, which is one of those, divorce movies, George Segal and Glenda Jackson. American Graffiti was this year too, which is also pretty joyful, at least until the end. But yeah, so it has 7 Oscars to its name. It won Picture, Director for George Roy Hill, Original Screenplay. I feel like the fact it being original is... I'm wondering how much they had to sort of dance around that and had to deal with what exactly was what in regards to this story. But editing, which we talked about, score we talked about, and production design and costumes. All the stuff that you would think it earned, it did. So yes, really great stuff. I've always really loved this movie, and I love that it's like really sort of widely beloved from the people that have seen it. Like, this is one of those movies where I don't know that I've heard a bad thing ever said about it in my life. I may just have not met the person yet. That there's always somebody out there that, like, really, really hates something. But I don't know that I've heard a bad thing ever said about this movie, and it's so easy to see why when you watch it. Like I said, maybe the most negative thing I can say about it is, like I said, I sort of feel like it's a bit responsible for spawning those movies later. That's feel like they're basically too cool for their audience. But this is by no means that. It's actually really the exact opposite. So, yes, I'm really happy with this and its Oscar success, of course. So to go on to Catch Me If You Can, Spielberg's movie with DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. This is one of those movies where, like, when you go through Spielberg's filmography, this is one I kind of almost forget about. And it's one of those cases where it almost seems like a movie too amazing to be true. Where you've got Spielberg, you've got DiCaprio, Hanks, you've also got another Oscar-nominated John Williams score on top of that. And it's also one of those movies that it came out in 2002, and you'll find a lot of faces in it that weren't exactly known at the time when you go back. And it's, once again, another one of those sort of, smooth movies. I did say before that I feel like The Sting is kind of, a bit more involving. But there is also something about Catch Me If You Can where it's like, it has that real smoothness to it, and it's fun to watch him, constantly get away with everything. But it doesn't feel like it's, sort of condescending to the audience or anything like that. But I think one thing that I think is where it seems like maybe slightly more alienating than something like The Sting would be that it's kind of, despite how much backstory we get, which is like the first half hour, there is a lot of question in regards to how he gets to this point, because obviously one of the big things about it is the Walken character, playing his father, who Walken also was nominated for this in supporting actor. So at this start, because we do get the very very beginning thing, when we see the where we're gonna circle back around to where he's already in custody and he's sort of trying to con his way out and trying to escape and all that, sort of giving us the vibe of like just how it's we're gonna basically see a huge contrast because right now we see him using his abilities to con as like this big act of desperation, whereas for most of the movie to see him get to this point, it's gonna seem so incredibly effortless. Like he like to the point where it like almost seems like it could be habitual. Like he just starts conning people just so before he even maybe even realizes he's doing it because he just does it that smoothly. But the thing here, though, is when we start off, we do see immediately his admiration for his dad. That's like the first real notable thing, and it's really one of the only times in the movie where we actually feel like we're looking at him, as himself. When his scenes with Walken, and how his dad's like his ultimate inspiration. Like when he's giving the speech at the beginning and telling the whole mouse story, and we see him like stand up and applaud like vigorously. And it's like at the start, it's kind of jarring that they start the way they do because when we see young Frank applauding his father, it's almost like because you already kind of have it in your head like everything Frank does is going to be fake, or is going to be a con in some way. Until it gets you in that area where you realize that pretty much anything in regards to his father is like one of the few times we'll actually see him being sincere throughout the movie. Um, and we do get to see, like one little planted seed in Frank's young mind. This scene when Walken goes and basically convinces the girl to, open the store with the necklace. And it's like that's about what we get because then the other thing that really sort of seems to drive Frank's direction here is his parents getting divorced after his mom bangs James Brolin. And then it just kind of goes from there. And then obviously the birthday thing, and then it's just like seemingly one thing, and then it's like it's almost like an addiction. It just takes off from there, and he just cannot stop, and it gets bigger and bigger, and the stakes get higher and higher every time he does this sort of thing. That just started off as this one simple, task to get some extra money. Um, and it like I was saying before, one of the more interesting aspects of the movie is just sort of watching his process in general, which we do get to see in great detail. Like I said, the forging the Pan Am checks, when he's like merely meticulously changing his name, learning all the terminology and all that stuff, doing actual studying in some cases, and in those little times where like early in his con career, if you want to call it that, like these almost slip ups that had a little bit of suspense, like him getting rejected by the bank manager, and then shortly after that he's doing a con, and that same bank manager is there. But then you just kind of have to go with the whole, oh, that bank manager sees so many people, it doesn't even register. So, and that's the other thing that Catch Me If You Can has that's worth noting and observing that's not in The Sting is the whole true story angle. To the point that Frank Abagnale was even in the movie as of course, ironically, I believe he's one of the cops that arrests him towards the end in France. So, as this goes on, though, you'll obviously realize that DiCaprio is like the perfect casting choice. Like there's many parts that DiCaprio's had where he just seems like, yeah, no other person could have done this, and this is easily at the top of that list. Where just that, like I said, that inherent smoothness to him, it's hard to imagine. I'm sure other actors would have had it, but to have that on top of like the youthfulness that the character has, the fact that we're supposed to buy him as like a teenager, and how DiCaprio can pretty much pull all of those off. And like I said, with the direction of Spielberg underneath him also, just really helps. But another one of my favorite aspects of the movie is this Hanks character, Carl Hanrat, who is it's not the interesting thing about this is that there's always going to be the guy that's chasing the con artist, and in movies like The Sting, you'll see a lot of the times they're portrayed as maybe a bit bumbling. And the thing about it is, obviously, Carl is extremely good at his job, he's just surrounded by bumbling people, and it basically makes it look like this whole thing is gonna fall apart and they're never gonna get anywhere, despite the fact that we know where we end up at some point because of the opening. But still, I mean, I can kind of see structurally why they did that, but I can also see having a nice impact if we didn't see that either. But I can take it or leave it that and that with that structure. But um, here, because you've got stuff like when they're doing the projector scene and the projector's like not working, and then you've got the moment when he like tells the joke, and we can sort of it's the moment when he tells the joke we can sort of see just like how much he not only does he feel high above the people he's stuck working with, but also just sort of we get a sense as an audience that this guy is not the bumbling agent that we would see in another movie like this, probably a more fictional one. It's my understanding that Carl Hanratty is by no means like a real person, and he didn't have like that sort of relationship with Frank throughout. He's more like a number of agents just kind of rolled together into one character that they added like a bit more of a personal touch. I think there was one agent I think I heard that he did kind of somewhat have like these calls and connections with, but I think not to the extent that we see with this more or less fictional Hanks character. So, in that, but the thing also here is that those connections when they're like on the phone. The thing I really like here that it is a great thing to add into the movie, whether it's part of the real story or not. Those details aren't entirely clear to me, so I'm just working with what it's vague details I heard. But this whole scene when really it becomes a tradition where he calls him like every Christmas or every Christmas Eve or something. And there's that first call though when we really see something in Carl and how we see Carl's real determination. Like, we see that throughout, but, like, really in this scene, we get to see the satisfaction that comes from that. Because we've got them just doing, the normal call thing, and of course, maybe one will somewhat open up to the other. And then it's at that moment that Carl has the epiphany. The reason you're calling me is because you have nobody else to call. And he starts laughing, and then when Frank hangs up on him, you can like see that satisfaction in Carl that he got under his skin by saying that and laughing at him. And that really sort of drives the sort of, chase angle we've got going with them throughout. And it's sort of adding that personal touch is definitely a good call telling a story like this. And then, of course, you've got the scenes when they have scenes together before he realizes who Frank is. Like scene where he catches him in the hotel, and at first, Hanks runs in, and he's not there, so we think it's like a fake out. And then just as we as the audience are like, oh, well, of course he got away, Frank comes out of the bathroom and just walks right up to him. And at first you're like, is he giving up already? But then it's like, no, we know the character better than this. So how exactly is he going to, do this? And just, like I said, immediately, it just, like, it's inherent in him. He just flows right into the whole, sort of Secret Service thing. And then the fact that he's able to add those little details in, like the hang on to my wallet thing. Like, those things that he knows is going to keep Hanks in place no matter how good Hanks is at his job. He just knows, like, there's one tiny little details to put into this con that will make it successful. And so, as it goes on and as he goes throughout these various things, going through these various professions, he meets random people on the way that, like I said, we may not have known as well in 2002 as we do now. Like Jennifer Garner, who I think Jennifer Garner had like just started Alias around this time. There was Elizabeth Banks, and most notably Amy Adams as the girl that kind of finally gets him to sort of... We get to see that sincerity kind of come back out of him that we haven't seen since the scenes with Walken. So, and like I said, we do get emotional scenes later, like when he finds out about Walken's death. And it's like the fact that it was... And I like the fact that they don't show anything either to allude to this. It's one of those cases where we kind of have to take Hanks' word for it, and we see it from the perspective of Frank, of like, when he says he fell down the stairs. And it's like, it just seems so mundane and so stupid, it's like it can't be. But then as it sort of settles in with us that it's, you know, true and what really happened, and it's like it makes it even more tragic that it was such a mundane and stupid death to happen to somebody. But and that's the way it is. But then, like I said, we sort of get to see the sincerity start to crawl back out when he meets Amy Adams. It seems to legitimately fall for her, and then goes to meet her family, which includes Martin Sheen. And the interesting thing about this is he's works with the sincerity so well, but he's also so good at the con aspect. We spend so much of these Amy Adams scenes wondering if he's being sincere or not. Even all the way up to the scenes when he's being practically interrogated by Martin Sheen, it's still kind of hard to tell. Because he plays that so well. But even like when he's talking to Martin Sheen, where it's like it's half confession but half con too. But then when it finally gets to the point when he's about to get caught, and we see that he confesses everything to Amy Adams and basically tries to get her to run away with him, is when we finally start to realize, oh, this was real. um, and in that very funny delivery of when he's saying all the things he lied about and all the things he actually is or actually isn't, and the thing that catches her is, so wait, you're not really Lutheran? And of all the things. And so, and it is like this really tragic scene when he genuinely feels like she was there to meet him, and then she realizes the whole sting of it. And it's like a genuine sort of pain. Not only that he was about to get caught, and that she almost did that, but we really get the sense that he did really want to run off with her. So, and it's like, of all the women we see him with, like the Elizabeth Bankses and the Jennifer Garners, the Amy Adams character that's, you know, really shy and meek with the braces is like the last person you expect to change him, and sure enough, of course. So finally we get to this moment when he gets cornered in France, and what I really, really love about this scene also that DiCaprio does brilliantly is what we've been talking about this whole time, is how damn smooth this motherfucker is, and how just everything is so calm, and he knows exactly how to do everything. It's like like the entire world is like clay in his hands, and he just uses this as much as he possibly can. He plays on the whole thing of people pretty much believe anything if they don't ask any questions, and it's like you can just walk in, and if you're wearing something or you say you're something, like the scene when he walks in and pretends to be the substitute teacher, and this goes on for so long, and it's like the way he's able to play on that because he just knows sort of human nature in general so well. And we see such a calculated person. When it comes to this scene, when Carl shows up in France and he's got Frank cornered, it is so, like, insane and jarring and says so much about the character and the arc, when we see him being so frantic and manic and kind of, like, out of his own control. And so that's always been, like, a really great scene to me, and just really shows that character in a way that would have been like the last way we'd expect him to be seen. But like I said, the Amy Adams thing kind of is the gateway to that, where the character is starting to change in really big ways. Especially as he's getting older throughout this as well, going from a teenager to this sort of young adult. You can obviously see the changes where, like, he's sort of finally starting to get that this at some point there's going to be a brick wall at the end of this road, this sort of easy street he's found his way down. And then, of course, a pretty more or less satisfying ending for us both. Like, if you appreciate him as a character and you're rooting for him, or if you think he's a con artist piece of shit that's gotten away with way too much, you kind of get the best of both worlds in regards to a comeuppance and an ending and all that. So, and the fact that he did end up doing, you know, enough good by helping, you know, the FBI and all that. There is something sort of, you know, genuinely satisfying in that ending. So yeah, that's what we have here. I think the one reason I don't necessarily always associate it with Spielberg's filmography, it's one of the last ones I think of when I'm thinking of him, is it does sort of, I've heard comparisons that, like, it was Spielberg trying his hand at Scorsese, which I can kind of, obviously, especially given this is 11 years before The Wolf of Wall Street, but still, which I think is the most, you know, comparable thing in regards to a Scorsese movie, I would say. Not just for DiCaprio's presence, but the young guy that just knows how to get away with everything and gets bigger and bigger until ultimately getting caught. So it doesn't quite have that Spielberg feel, despite the fact that we do have a great John Williams score as well. So uh, yeah, but if I had to choose between these two, like I said, I do feel like The Sting is a bit more involving, and the characters are more like we really get a sense more of. Well, I guess it's hard to say because for both movies you can say we're not quite sure. I guess we do get more of a vibe where Frank comes from because we get somewhat of a backstory, which you can't necessarily say about Newman or Redford. But I feel like once as you're watching the movies and you watch them work, that's how you get to know them. It's like how they work as opposed to knowing their backstories. And to me, that's more interesting in most cases, I would say. And then, like I said, just the cons themselves, like I said, are just so involving and so elaborate. And watching them actually work out is like so satisfying. Also, um, but obviously, Catch Me If You Can also has like a really big thing. Everybody I knew was going crazy for this when it came out. Even my science teacher in 6th grade was like raving about it in class before it started one day after she and her husband had seen it. And it was so. But I would say I probably prefer The Sting, and like I said, mainly also because it was like it's the poster child for doing this kind of thing without being condescending to the audience. Which, like I said, movies trying to sort of copy it afterwards have fallen under that. So, but like I said, there's not much condescension really visible at all in Catch Me If You Can either. So it's yeah. But what it comes down to is I prefer The Sting personally. So that's where I stand with that. So next we're gonna get somewhat sport like, not like the traditional sports you think of when you think of sports, but yeah, and obviously one of them's gonna be a Best Picture winner. So with that said, you probably know what it is now. So until that, that's it for this.